Good afternoon. My name is Wilmarie Newton, and I'd like to thank you for joining us for today's webinar. We will be answering questions at the end of the presentation, so please hold your questions until that time, then you can type them into the question box. If you have further questions after the webinar has ended, please feel free to email them to me, and I will forward them to the appropriate person that can answer them. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be archived on CABE's website under Professional Development. And now I'd like to introduce Patrice McCarthy, Executive Director and General Counsel of CABE.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this important webinar during Black History Month. We are absolutely delighted to have the chance to talk to you and with you about the impact that the legislative requirement for the Black and Latino Studies course has on our students in Connecticut. I will be joined today by Dr. Brackeen-Harris, who serves as a consultant to CABE on our diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, and a very special welcome to Denise Moller, a teacher at the Bridge Academy, and Kyle Nedrick, who is a student at Bridge Academy. It's a real pleasure to have those that have experienced this course be with us to share the impact. And it's especially nice since the Bridge Academy is actually an educational affiliate of CABE. I'm just going to give a brief background on the history of this legislation, and then I'll be turning it over to Martha for facilitation of our discussion. So in 2019, the Connecticut General Assembly enacted Public Act 19-12, which included the requirement that African American and Black and Puerto Rican and Latino studies be included in the required program of studies that are outlined in the Connecticut statutes. The requirement is that every district offer a 1-credit course. Districts were allowed to begin offering that course with the 2021-2022 school year and were required to offer the course in 22-23. Now, I know some districts have experienced challenges with having enough students to meet their minimum enrollment in order to offer a course, but they are looking at creative ways to bridge those challenges. And I think that as students enter high school and have the opportunity to think ahead about planning their course of study, that it will be more feasible for more of our districts to be able to offer the course because they will have achieved that minimum enrollment. It appears that at the Bridge Academy, that has not been one of the challenges that they have faced, and that's why it's great that they're able to join us today. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Brackeen-Harris, and she'll get us going. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrice. And again, welcome to our friends from, now your friends from Bridge Academy. I'm going to begin by providing an overview of the curriculum development process. Writing a curriculum is a very complex process. I was honored to be a member of the advisory group and to be involved in the process, both on a large scale by working in collaboration with all of the other advisory committees, and on a small scale by helping to develop the professional learning outline and recommendations. This work was led by the State Education Research Center of Connecticut, CERC. It's exciting to be talking with students today, with our student Kyle today, because the student perspective and advocacy drove the law that mandated the course development, and students had an integral role in shaping the course content. I think that's really unique and so important that students have a voice in what they are going to learn or what they want to learn. Paquita Jarman-Smith, who's a CERC consultant on the project, remarked, quote, "We heard from students that yes, they wanted to hear the beauty, the historical greatness of these peoples from the past, all the way to the present. They wanted to learn about their legacy, fighting for justice. They wanted to learn more about the arts. the sciences, the innovation, and the culture that has impacted our world in the past, today, and beyond. 150 people volunteered to join the advisory group to work on developing this curriculum, each adding their voice to the work, including lawmakers who sponsored Public Act 1912, State Senator Douglas McCrory, State Representative Bobby Gibson, and State Representative Bobby Sanchez. The members on the advisory group included college educators, K-12 teachers, historians, and museum representatives, parents, students, and community advocates. There were 7 advisory committees to do this work, and they had the task of going into depth beginning in January 2020 and completed and submitted by January 2021. I know from myself and my husband, who was on one of the committees, that we spent many, many hours doing our tasks because we really wanted to honor the deadline so we could get started on this wonderful adventure. Each committee had a clear purpose, and members committed numerous hours throughout the year to complete the task. These committees included, and it's amazing that it takes this many committees to figure out one course, but you had our African American Black content development course syllabus, focus groups, integration of content and assessment, professional learning plan, publication and dissemination, Puerto Rican Latino content development, and research and evaluation. For me, the fact that this course is the first of its kind to combine both African American, Black, and Puerto Rican Latino studies into one course. This is what we strive to do in education, build bridges. It is intentionally designed to accentuate the individual and joint contributions of these groups to our collected history. Yes, it was intensive work, but the importance of working to capture our country's full history is well worth it. So before we begin our panel discussion, I'd like for our guests, beginning with Denise Moller and followed by Kyle, to introduce themselves and tell us something they would want us to know about them. So Denise.
I'm unmuted now. Okay, hi, I'm Denise Moller. This is my 5th year teaching at Bridge Academy, my 26th year teaching altogether. And I was part of the pilot group who taught the course last year, and obviously I'm continuing to do so this year.
My name is Kyle Nedrick. Miss Moller I was Miss Moller's first student at Bridge Academy in 8th grade. So yeah, and I really enjoyed it because I'm from the islands.
Great, thank you so much. Now I think there's a presentation. Are you ready for that, Denise?
Ready as I will be. So I can go ahead and start, sorry. So just, it's really a quick overview. I'm sorry, I've been teaching all morning, so I'm like, one more time. Okay, so about our program, which I guess you can't see because now this is totally, I don't know how to get everything out of here. All right, the Bridge Academy, we are a charter school in Bridgeport. One of the things that our principal did, as Kyle mentioned, I was his 8th grade teacher, and a few years ago, I was, oh my goodness, I don't know how to click out of here. Sorry. Audience view. Nope, I don't want to. All right, sorry, I'm just going to do the best I can. So this is what happens in class a lot. So I taught in the middle school, and then a few years ago, Mr. Elliott, our principal, called to see if I would be interested in teaching this new course and to come downstairs to the high school. And my first reaction, of course, was yes, because most of my life has been spent as a high school teacher. So to get back to high school from middle school, I was excited. But my first question to him was, am I the right person? And it's still something that I struggle with, honestly, on a daily basis, because in our classroom, I'm the only white person. And so for me to be teaching this, African-American, Black, Puerto Rican, and Latino studies to a completely African-American, Black, Puerto Rican, and Latino group is a little weird. And it took, some time to have a little bit of buy-in, but that was the great thing about the curriculum, was that, especially last year, because those were kids I had never taught before, we were able to bond over the curriculum because it was such great stuff. And then, the relationships kind of came from that. But the first impressions that those kids had last year was, oh my God, why is this white lady in here teaching us about our history? And is she going to do this, the right way? Is it going to be honest and, factual? And so that's something obviously that I strive to do every day. And one thing that makes Bridge a little bit different than everybody else, or almost everybody else in the state, I think another school system does this as well. It is a mandatory senior course. So our kids have no choice if they want to take it or not, which I think is great, but maybe the kids don't always think it's great to have to add another thing, and it's a senior course, so it's one more thing for the seniors to have to do. So one of the questions was about resources. Do you know how to minimize this? To get it out of the way, Kyle can do. So it was already mentioned, the just overwhelming amount of resources that were created by the committees. And so we have a full curriculum that can be used. And that is incredible, but it's also incredibly overwhelming, because I've never in all my years of teaching had such a dense and rich curriculum to work with. I honestly still haven't read, thank you, Kyle, that's wonderful. I still haven't finished reading all of the books in the book bundle that was sent, but I'm, kind of clicking away at it as much as I can when I can do so. So it's been great to have those resources. One thing I guess I would say is that because there were so many great resources, it was hard for me, and it still is hard for me, to keep up with the pace of the suggested curriculum. And one of the reasons for that is that the students, through no fault of their own, don't really have a lot of background knowledge, because in the state of Connecticut, and of course, I've taught in Louisiana and Texas prior to this, there's not much importance placed on, African-American studies, and especially not a lot placed, if any at all, on Latino studies. And so the kids didn't have a background with which, to work. And that's especially true, but I think it's also kind of, for me, selfishly, especially wonderful in the second semester, because almost everything is, pretty new to what the kids are learning. So I try my best to stay true to what the curriculum is, but I've had to modify it to make it more palatable for the kids, based upon just regular formative, stuff happening in the classroom, but also I do course evaluations both at the semester and then at the end of the year. Big reflection about this. So Dr. Hassan Kwame Jeffries, who's wonderful out of Ohio State, one of the first things the kids watch is his TED Talk about hard history and how we need to teach it. And, then they remember, like, the little children's imprints, of their hands on the bricks at James Madison's plantation. And so it's that, desire to reach back to the past to see how it still connects to the present that I try to do a lot in the class. And definitely tackle the hard history, because you can't not. I mean, we don't sugarcoat anything in class, from any perspective. And I really try this year, the kids did a wonderful presentation at the end of the first semester, where they did something from Clint Smith's wonderful book, again, like something that inspires me all the time. And their project was called The Echoes of Enslavement. And so they picked a topic and they researched that topic today, but traced it back to the days of enslavement. And that might be something that Kyle can speak to in a moment. And then just one of the things that was really cool for me last year was to see the ways that locally the kids could connect to the curriculum, and the way that they actually also had these family connections. And so I mentioned here, Little Liberia was something that the kids had kind of heard of in elementary school, learned a little bit more about in middle school, but you know, we looked this year at, like, you know, Frederick Douglass writing about Little Liberia in the North Star and creating this, you know, this haven for free Black people, you know, which is literally about a mile away from our school. And so the kids, you know, see that, and, you know, hopefully there's more restoration going on, because I'm pretty sure they just got a grant, so that will be, you know, really exciting to see. An article that we read early on is, you know, Connecticut, the state that slavery made, which came, it was a whole series in the Hartford Current, and I'm not, Connecticut Magazine, sorry, before I even moved back here, so maybe it was 2016. But the kids, you know, we don't normally talk about enslavement in our state, right? We're like, oh, we have the Underground Railroad. We, you know, had a lot of free African Americans, yes, but there was also enslavement. And so we looked at, you know, just the economics within Connecticut of enslavement, and how we have those connections that can still talk about, you know, injustices today. One thing that the students today are actually doing that was probably one of those top teacher moments last year, when we were looking at what we call kind of the Spanish system in motion, when the conquistadors came. One of the assignments is for, you know, students to be making these slides and into groups. The kids are, and one student in each group is looking at different massacres that the conquistadors you know, had against the indigenous population. And all of a sudden, one of my students, who is from Mexico, got really excited, and he was like, "Miss, I have to call my mother." And I was like, okay. And that's because his parents were, you know, from the community at Cholula, which was, you know, devastated by Cortez and his men. And he was like, this is history that his family had talked about, you know, but he just kind of was like, oh, you know, this is something that happened. He's like, oh my gosh, I know where that church is that they're talking about. I see it when I go visit my family. And it was like, it was just incredible for him to see that, incredible for all of us, really. Again, when just talking about it gets me excited just to see himself in the curriculum. And that's something that I think is so important for our students, is that they're seeing themselves in this curriculum over and over and over again. Another, you know, great teachable moment came when we were looking at the, you know, horrific scientific tests that were done all over the islands of Puerto Rico. But one student in particular has a grandfather who, you know, lives on the island of Vieques. And she's like, oh my gosh, we've gone and visited there, and there are these places where you just can't go, and it looks so nice. And so again, her grandfather telling her when he was growing up things that had happened, and now she's learning about it at school. And it's something that might seem trite, but it's really important and exciting for these kids to, you know, see their lives and their experiences reflected in what they're learning in the classroom. And then just the final piece that was super cool for us last year, we were reading about the Young Lords, and it was really getting close to the end of the year. And I found an article, because we had, you know, looked at the Young Lords nationally, looked at Young Lords in West Hartford, and I found an article about the Young Lords in Bridgeport. And after like reading the first sentence, one of the kids was like, Miss, can we just go walk around? Because where our school is, all the different parts that, you know, where the headquarters were, where they had set up a food pantry at a church, all of it's within walking distance of our school. Where they had protests at Washington Square is literally right across the train tracks. And so it was, you know, just really just this way to not only see themselves reflect in the curriculum, but one of the themes of agency and resistance, I'm hoping that they get from it is they can be those people. You know, it's not all just about the big names in history. It's about what groups of regular people are doing. And that's, you know, pretty much it. A couple of things, you know, the kids said from last year, they just wished they had more time, because there was not enough time to learn everything. It was informative and interesting. The lessons and discussions were very intriguing, and everybody was, you know, constantly involved. One kid said, I give this course 11 out of 10, absolutely loved the course and learned a lot about Black history that I'm not sure I would have learned unless I did my own research, especially like doing presentations, gallery walks. There was some generic stuff, but really what this child said, but I know the hardcore truth. This class stirred up a lot of emotions and helped me to realize more things. And I can go on with the, the stuff that the kids said from last year, but I think that it's a fabulous course. I wish almost that I could have a year to teach the African American and Black history part, and then another year to teach the Puerto Rican and Latino part, because it's also wonderful that I'm really bad at cutting out stuff. And then just one last piece from me, just a shout out to Bridge, because we are, again, one of the first places to do this, and we are certainly a place that our kids, it's going to be part of their senior year from now through forever. And then another cool thing that we've been able to do as part of this course, we've hooked up with the Ruby and Calvin Fletcher African American History Museum, and we actually have a docent program. So our kids are, we have student volunteers who aren't just giving tours, but they're also, they've gotten involved in the behind the scenes stuff at the museum. So they're actually, taking pictures and classifying different, artifacts that people are sending in. And so it's just been a really cool experience that I'm not sure we would have had we not created this course. So that is my part. And now I think I can stop sharing the screen and come back up this way. And now we can go to Kyle.
Okay, so thank you. I would like to just ask you a question. First of all, it's
Sure.
to see your enthusiasm about teaching this course. I could sit down and talk with you and listen to you for days, and I know you have so much, you've learned so much, but you're sharing so much. And I have a question. It's going to be very important that we have other teachers and other teachers who are not of color to take on the challenge of teaching something they may be apprehensive about. What advice would you give someone who said, I really want to do it, but I don't think I'll do well because I don't know enough? And how might you convince somebody? What maybe would be some things that you would say so that they would use trust?
That's a great question. I think what I actually did the summer prior to doing it, I had the 35 hours worth of training. So obviously I would tell the person, if that training's still available, I don't know, I know it was for our cohort, to do it, because looking through the curriculum itself is very daunting, but being able to chunk it out and look at it like we ask our students to do, right? To break it down with other people, ask questions so that you feel like you know more. I mean, you're never, again, I still don't know all the stuff that I need to be teaching. But one thing that I did was I bought off Amazon a little stuffed elephant on the first day of school last year. I was like, okay, we've heard the expression, the elephant in the room. And, what does that mean? And nobody wanted to say anything. And then, one kid finally was like, you're white, and like, no one else is. And all the kids were like, oh my God. I'm like, no, that's exactly it. So I think owning it, knowing that you've got to put in the work, you've got to make sure that you're teaching the history accurately. And even though, I mean, I tell the kids, I'm like, I can be every white person for you. I don't know how all white people feel, but there are times when it's just like, why are white people like that? I'm like, well, I don't know, but so I think it's just all about being honest with the kids. And again, like, I will never know what it is like to be a Black, an African American, a Puerto Rican, or a Latino person in America, but I want to understand not only the wonders of all the accomplishments, but also understand how the history has impacted the way that all these different groups look at the United States, look at their role in it, and look at white people like me. So I think it's all about just making sure that they're learning, making sure that they're honest, and knowing that we're all here to learn and to better ourselves. I don't know if that answers your question, but hopefully.
And my takeaway from your wonderful comments would be, it's just good teaching.
Yeah, there
If
you
you
go.
are a teacher, no matter what challenge there is before you, if you really love teaching and you're in the profession because you want to make a difference, then I can't think of a better way as to challenge yourself with something that you may be apprehensive about. So thank you very much. But I really want to hear some words from Kyle now, if you don't mind. Kyle, I would love to ask you some questions. Is that okay with you? And take your
Yeah, that's
time
fine.
and then you answer. Okay. So the first question is, why did you decide to take this course? And what was the process you had to go through in order to get it on your schedule and register?
When I first got the class, I was like a little iffy because I thought it was gonna be like the regular thing that I was learning when I first came to America. It was about Martin Luther King and what he did. It didn't go into detail. It was just the basic. But then as it went on and I got the course and I was in class, I started to learn deeper meanings or like deeper stuff into what it was about or like how many different people or who was important, and it wasn't just those two faces. Like for example, Marcus Garvey, he was a Jamaican hero, and I didn't know that he came to America, and he was working to help us or migrate all the black people to Africa. It was just that, oh, I knew he was a hero. I didn't learn nothing else. And then I learned that there was black people spent a lot of time or helped a lot of research, and they played a big part in where we are today. It wasn't like just a sole group of people that did cause that, or it was like a buildup of different things that caused slavery to happen and stuff like that.
That's great. And since you took the course, have you ever, have you heard about some of the things that you learned in the course that had you not been in the course, you wouldn't have even noticed that it was important? Has that sort of spilled over in something you've heard?
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, I wanted to know if, you have all this new information in your course, that you've learned. Has anything come up sort of like when you were watching something on TV and they referred to Marcus Garvey that you would not have known before? Was there anything there that I know it's still new for you, all that, but that has, that you've noticed that you wouldn't have noticed before, or that now you would question because you have all this new experience?
Oh, yeah, I have learned some stuff. Like, for example, when the other day I was watching TV with my mom, and they brought up a good point, or for the echoes of enslavement still, I learned that, or like I learned there was a deeper meaning towards it. Like, for example, for George Floyd, I didn't know. I just thought, for me, it was like, okay, uh, I can't really do nothing about it because it's not gonna change. But like over time, I learned that there has been change, and this class has showed me that like there is change is happening. It's just happening slowly, and I learned more information. Like for example, for my project for the echoes of enslavement, I did racial profiling. I saw that racial profiling has been happening for a long time. For like the first racial profiling that happened was slavery, and then it led on to the Louisiana law, where they were locking up black people for not like getting a job, or just lock them up so they can be slaves again. And then as it moved on, it was like for Tulsa. For example, the other day, Tulsa was another example. And I went to Tulsa with my dad the other day, and I was like, oh, I know this place. And then he was telling me about it, and I was like, yeah, I learned this in the class. I remember that. I remember that they were a good economy that made their money, or like got all their money or spread it all in the community when they didn't come out. And it was like, oh, they didn't like that and they burned it down. And my dad was telling me, I'm like, yeah, I learned that in class. And I was like, I was intrigued. And then and then I ended up telling my mom about it because my mom doesn't know, because she's from the islands and she didn't have like history in America, so she doesn't know any of that. And I was like, and I was telling her everything about it.
So basically, you become the teacher, and you can help others to understand. And I was really interested. Your responses were great, and I really was interested in how you talked about George Floyd and you connected what you learned in class and sort of brought together what has happened before can help us to understand what's happening in our world today. So thank you. I have another question for you, Kyle. What were your expectations of this course?
My expectations, it was like, for me, it wasn't really high because I thought it was just gonna be like the same thing about Martin Luther King or like Rosa Parks, and then it was later, and they were very like, okay, it's just another class, but over time I've learned, while I've had this class, I learned stuff that I've never learned before, or I don't think I would have learned if I didn't take this class, and especially for Latino studies, we just recently learned that it was more than just every time they blamed Columbus, and it was more of like a whole thing, like everybody played a part in what happened. For example, the king and queen played a part in they went out and sought out Columbus and made him their explorer, and he did all of that because they were funding it. So, and then the men could have said no at one point, but they didn't. They decided to just continue. And then the system of empire, they were just following and they just wanted land, expand. So it's like, over time I've learned stuff that I wouldn't learn, and and I've liked the class, or I've grown to enjoy it. And I really hope I would have learned more about this or had this class earlier in my high school career or my high school. Yeah. So yeah.
Good. Now, there's a saying that says, we need to show students windows and mirrors. And that means that, have you heard that expression?
Yeah, I've heard
Okay,
it before.
okay, good. So it's important for you to be able to look into others' lives and to know what other people have done in the past and people who didn't look like you. That's always important, so we know about this, our country and all the different kinds of people. But there's that one word that it's called identity. And I would love to know how you felt when you saw who you are reflected in what you were learning. Just, can you talk about, just help us to know, to understand that phrase a little bit more, but know how it impacted you just on a personal level, not, your heart, not just the intellectual facts that you learned.
For me, it was like, for me, identity, I didn't know. It was like, okay, I've learned since I've had this class, I've learned to accept myself or like be proud of who I am or where I came from. It was like, okay, I'm just Jamaican. I came up here for a better life. And then it was like nothing else, but like over time, since I've had this class, it was like Miss Moller has showed me that it's more to it. And then and you don't have to go by like what people say, and you can be different, and you should be a leader, a follower. And yeah.
Great. This is for Denise. Are you still there?
Yep.
I want to know, what did you learn about yourself by teaching this course?
Wow, that's a good one. I think what I most learned about myself was that I kind of always prided myself on being open to new ideas, new opportunities, and kind of being self-reflective. And this really challenged, was I really, able to do that? And I kind of, I've thought about a lot past, like what I was doing in the past. It's, neither here nor there, but I have a tattoo on my ankle and it's a tribal design. I was like, oh my gosh, when I was 19, I didn't know anything about cultural appropriation. And now I'm like, that kind of thing exists. And so these, and we did a whole lesson just like 2 weeks ago on microaggressions.
Yeah.
And so I noticed that a lot. And I think that I'm so, I don't know, I'm kind of living in that metaverse all the time, trying to make sure that I'm learning and open to new ideas and not kind of thinking that my own path is finished. Because I think as soon as I do that, then I'm not going to learn anymore. And I constantly want to hear, the questions, the criticisms, the issues that kids might have. Because again, I might do or say something that I don't realize is incorrect. But I think that's the thing. So like challenging to keep myself open to all the, learn new ideas and realizing things I had done in the past, I still can change that. I can change how I'm looking at the future and how I, act and how I expect my own children, to do. So I guess that would be what I learned about myself.
Yeah, thank you. And did I hear you in the back, Kyle, when she said microaggressions? Sort of make an exclamation. Do you want to talk about that just for a little bit and what that meant to you learning about
Yeah, I didn't really know about microaggressions. I just thought it was just a regular thing. Like, for example, one of the sayings I used to hear when I speak Jamaican, like my mom or dad when I first came here, was "This is America, speak English." And I didn't really think of anything. I didn't really think it was a big deal, or I didn't think of it as like a microaggression. But since I came in class, I learned that there's some things that are microaggression and micro. So it's like it has made me realize certain stuff that I would have never realized before.
Great, great. So we have a lot of board members on this call, and I would like you to just say what you would want board members to know. Because the board members spend a lot of time, working with the superintendent and trying to make sure that that all students are reaching their potential. So what would you like them to know that might help them do their job?
I would say for it to be like for if we were to put it in place, like for it to be easier or like the school give it more time or like more time to focus on one thing or like get to know this topic better than rushing it and then forcing another one. Cause when it's forced, you're not really like learning it or you're not really putting it in your head. You're just trying to get over the topic and move on so you can it's not gonna like stick to you. But if you have the time to do it, you're gonna remember it because it's gonna be engraved. And then if you have more like examples or more projects, you might. I remember my projects from 8th grade because it was like, okay, I did the work and I got a good grade and I had the time to do it. So I always remember those projects.
Do you think having more money to sort of do trips or to make the course even richer would help, or do you think you had kind of a lot of things on your plate and didn't know whether there was something that you really would have loved to have had?
I would say more funding would be better, like more trips, because it would be, for example, when we were talking about a museum in Hartford, it would have been great if we could have went up there and seen it in person or seen what we're talking about that's in Connecticut instead of just learning it and seeing photos of it in class. I think it would have grabbed. It's every student is different, and some students get their attention span off of being there in person, and it would like grab their attention better, or it would make it more interesting than just staying in the classroom and just learning about the topic. You can just go there, and then it would be way better.
Yeah, may I?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I would definitely agree with the idea for more funding to be able to do trips and stuff. And also, I think I love the point that Kyle made, because it does seem oftentimes I'm like, okay, and we've just done this. Hopefully you've learned it now. We have to move on to the next thing. And hopefully we're making those connections, and it doesn't always happen. I think it would be great if we were able to embed more of this in the early curriculum. And so it's not just coming, senior year or junior, whatever kids are taking it all at once, all together. Then if it was more of like, they've gotten it in their other history classes, so now like with this class, it's more of a 20th century view, or even late 19th to early 20th, but you try to do like African history up through the present in, by the end of December is really, that's really hard. So I think that, but the funding to be able to just go on trips, even into, going and walking around Harlem, as Kyle said, walking around at museums in Hartford, going up to Simsbury and seeing the farm where Martin Luther King, worked, summers, to then realize, oh my gosh, this is possible, to integrate. So just anything like that. And I'm like, yeah, experiential learning, I think, is the best way. And so I echo everything Kyle said.
Thank you very much. I agree with that. We have such a rich history in Connecticut that people don't know about. And I always find that to have real students really go out and experience something, to stand on the land where, others have stood, and to go in a cemetery and see the headstone of someone that you read about, because we do have lots of stories about how Connecticut has really been in the fight for justice. So, that's great. So Kyle, I want to ask you something that may seem a little personal, but do you ever have you ever spoken with your other people in the course outside of the classroom? I used to feel that when I was teaching, I taught for many years, and when the bell rang, I could be in the middle of a sentence, and the inclination was, okay, let me close this, done with this for today. I don't have to worry about this till I'm doing my homework or until I get back in here. But did it impact some of the conversations that you've had with others when you weren't in the classroom?
Yeah, as I said, it's like since I've taken this course or like this class, I've started to talk to my mom more about the history, and I've started to inform her, and I'm able to talk to my dad about history that I didn't know before, or he knew, but it wasn't like we weren't clicking, or like I didn't understand where he's coming from, or when he did say something, I was confused on because I learned something different, or I didn't learn that. So now it's like when I talk to him, I have more of me and him can have a better conversation. And if we go somewhere, he can point somewhere out or some place that I have talked about before. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I know what you're talking about. Or I can be like, oh, that's the place, or places like that. Or for my mom now, whenever I learn something, like whenever she comes from work and she's talking about history, she watches the news when she's hearing about the history or watching the news, or I bring it up and I tell her things that she doesn't know or didn't know about the history of America.
You bonded with some of the people in your class that you otherwise may not have even gotten to know over experiences that you had with this course?
Yeah, some of my classmates bring it up.
Go ahead,
Some of my
sorry.
class, some of my classmates bring it up outside of class, and we can like talk about the situation, or we can, or for example, when we were talking about before I did my project, or before we got into racial profiling for the accusation enslavement, we were talking about it, or how it was like there's change, but there's not really that much change in America. We were having a good art or a discussion about it, in like it was it was one day we were outside, and then we seen something. We seen like it was like a cop, and then it was like okay, and then my friends were talking about it. They was like, oh, we only have like black cops or mostly black cops in Bridgeport. And I was like, okay, you have to know like the history of it, or like it's not like we like paint cops as like bad people, but it's like some are good. And in this course, I've learned that like some cops racial profile, some don't, because there are good cops in history that when you look at, or when I've looked at it in class, we've talked about it, but it's like okay, we don't talk about them a lot. We just look at the bad things, and everybody and each group, or it's more than one person that's responsible for a certain thing. And we've talked about that a lot with my friends and certain family members, like my auntie, my grandma. I talked about her because they grew up in America, or like they came to America at like 20, and I've like talked to them about history that they didn't know or they didn't learn in school, and we've had a good conversation about it. Or my younger cousin, like she's in 6th grade now, she's learning about the history, and she comes home, tells me about it, and we have a conversation about
That's great. This question is for Denise. I know you talked about, you had some data, what the your students said about the course, but in your heart, what do you hope will change for some students, if in their general attitude towards their education? What just like what would be really great to hear from them, about the impact in other parts of their lives that your course made?
I think back again to that day last year. I think it was in May, or maybe it was early June, one of the two, when we were walking around as we learned about the Young Lords. And so, or learning about kids in LA rising up in the 1960s because, Hispanic and Latino children were being told, you're going to go into industrial lab. There's no way you can take these higher math classes. And the kids actually led, walkouts. And so I think for me, it's more again, that idea, we're not just teaching about like the couple of people that you see for a month every year, but it's about like, oh my gosh, look at what these students did. Look at what these young people did. Look at what these people who were living in a community and saw a problem were doing. And so that, whether a kid decides to go to college or not, or, they can be involved in their community and look around and see, ways to try to change and improve it. And I think that's really social studies education in a nutshell for me, is like encouraging kids to, realize that they are the change and that they can make a difference.
Mhm. Thank you. So we'll go back to you, Kyle. Now that the course, now that you've had this experience, where do you go from here with all of this? Where do you take it? What are you going to do with it in the future? What, how is it going to influence you in some way?
it. I plan on like informing people that don't know about like history, or like the full history of what really happened. Like my brother, for example, if he doesn't, or when my brother does get older, because he's in 1st grade right now, as he gets older, if he goes on and he doesn't know about the history, or he isn't learning the right or the full history or the hard history, I'll inform them about it, or I'll continue to teach my mom about it, or I teach people that don't know about the history, or inform them about the history that has happened, the hard history.
What do you, have you thought about what you may do personally about being more of an advocate for social justice? I mean, what things might that lead you, knowing this, might that lead you to do in a positive way to try to make a difference in what's going on with people?
I know that in Connecticut there are ways for like to get the word around. So I think later on, if it's like after I'm finished, like probably like next year or 2 years or 2 years from now, I might go and become like a speaker, like in or what do you call it?
Advocate.
Yeah, advocate or spread the word about what's really happening and inform people instead of like it continuing to be a constant cycle of just constant protests and then it's not getting anywhere. So I think over time I'm gonna be a part of the change or try to play my part. I can't do everything, but I will try. I will play my part, my small part in like getting the change.
Mhm. Well, your small part and someone else's small part, and then another person's small part can really end up being a big part. So don't negate the power of one, the power of what you can do as someone, because already you're more knowledgeable than many adults. I'll just tell you that. You know, we have not had the opportunity to have this experience that you've had. So really, I want you to really embrace what you've learned and not think, nobody wants to hear that. It doesn't matter, I don't know enough. If your teacher did that, you wouldn't have had the great experience of having her as your teacher. You know, so I just really encourage you, and I think you'd be a wonderful advocate and a wonderful speaker. So, you know, just you know, I'm cheering you on because I really see so much good in you. So Denise, would you mind talking about movement of the day? And do you have any trepidation or something when you hear what's happening to other people who are teaching these histories around our country? You know, if whatever you're comfortable with sharing.
Yeah, I taught in Louisiana for 20 years. Yes. And in one of the places where I taught for 7 years, it was in North Louisiana, I was not allowed to say that slavery was even a cause of the Civil War, let alone the cause of the Civil War. And that was the early 2000s. So, and there were lots of, we talked about microaggressions here. In my past places where I lived in Louisiana and Texas, it was all just macroaggressions constantly. And so I do thank the heavens that I teach here in Connecticut. I also obviously teach at a school that's very supportive of what we're learning. I share this information with, people who I know who are still teaching in Louisiana. And I also just participated in a cohort over the fall with people from all over the country with Learning for Justice organization. And so those teachers were talking about, just how careful they have to be. And so we actually spent a few of our sessions on that, like, how can we get this information without basically potentially getting a teacher fired? And I do think in some places in Connecticut, because unfortunately I've had conversations with people in our own state that, you know, there are parents who are looking out because they think that the class and anything that you teach with this history is about like making kids hate white people. And it can't be further than the truth. And what I always kind of come back at that with is what makes kids hate, if you want to even use that word, the power structure. So of course, in this case, it would be, you know, the white power structure is keeping information from them. Not saying, hey, this is what happened in the past. Like, we have to be open with that. And I think until we are, that trepidation that people have and that idea that, oh, kids are going to hate people now because they've learned what happened in the past is ridiculous. And so, you know, I could go on for hours with that question because I do show the kids the map of like all the places where, you know, CRT is not allowed to be taught. And, oh, look, most of those places are also where there was enslavement of individuals. Oh, and we can look at, you know, how many African Americans live in these states, and we can look at then the prison population in those. So here we can examine those things. And I mean, I've told people before, I'm like, I would have been fired so many times in the last 6 years, but certainly in this last year, if I taught like half of this, if I lived back in Louisiana or Texas, yeah, I would not be teaching anymore. So I think that's a real concern for a lot of teachers. Thankfully, I would hope not here in Connecticut. I think there are, what, 10 districts that aren't offering the course, and hopefully that will be able to be offered, but I'm hoping that it's not one of the reasons why, is not this fear of like hating white people kind of thing.
I think just by hearing you talk, I hope that some people will say, well, you know what? Teachers are well trained, and I'm going to put my trust in that teachers are doing the right thing, and they are presenting, you know, they're not being biased, and they're just presenting what is and allowing the students to learn something about critical thinking. Because by trying to sway someone, we as teachers know, you know, that's not going to help the students. That's about us. And we, you know, we come in the classroom with that neutrality and just present to students. So we're going to take questions, but not quite yet. I have one last question. Suppose I just came on here because I didn't know much about this course, but I just figured maybe it was time for me to start getting more involved in knowing what's happening in our schools in Connecticut, being a responsible board member. Can you suggest a book that you think would be a great read for someone just wanting to start to learn about the course, or just the, you know, reasonings why we need to complete our history? So, and I'll ask you, Denise, to start, and Kyle, I want to ask you after that if you can tell me about any reading or book that you enjoyed learning. So we'll start with Denise.
I would say just because of the overwhelming beauty of his writing, Clint Smith, if you just pick up and read How the Word is Passed, and it really just ties together beautifully contemporary issues with enslavement in our country, as well as and he does take one of the chapters is about going back to Africa, but I think that it's full of facts, but it's written because he's a poet, and you can just tell with his words coming off the page. And literally everything Clint Smith writes, I'm like, okay, so, time to read. I would say that would be a good beginning. And then, oh my gosh, I can see the book now. It's black. It's basically about Puerto Rico, and I can't remember the name of it, but it's a book about, based on like Howard Zinn, but it's about Black and Latino in America. That would be a great one. Or Getting the Idea of Being Latino in America, El Norte, and I can't remember the author of that one. So that book, oh, I'm gonna be mad that I can't remember the name of that second book, because that's actually a really good one, and I use a lot of information from it. So that's really embarrassing that I can't remember.
think of it later. Just chime in again because we still have some time. So, Kyle, are you ready to share some story?
In 8th grade. Yeah. One thing that I would say that did catch my attention, or maybe at first I did. We first watched it in 8th grade, and it caught my attention, and it made me want to learn more about it. It was the movie Glory, because it went into detail about how it's like white people and black people could work together, and it had a deeper meaning towards it, and it wasn't like just a regular show. And then the next one was a short film that we watched about Tulsa. It went into detail, or it showed everything, and it was very interesting, and it caught my attention.
Thank you. So now we're going to transition into questions and answers. Marie, do we have any questions?
We do have some questions. Martha and Denise, I have kind of been playing mute tag because when you're both unmuted, we get feedback. So Denise, when you're not speaking, if you could just mute yourself, and that way I can concentrate on the questions. So our first question is, with respect to the curriculum, are the schools able to modify it?
Yes. The first year we were told do not modify. And so it was really hard. And then the second year I actually had the fortune of CERC reached out and asked if I would present on one of the lessons, one of the units. And they're like, oh, sure, we definitely modify it because you have to. There are just some, I was able to see last year, like the difference between when a college professor wrote lessons for a unit and when a high school teacher did. Because the expectations of what is possible in a short period of time are very different in a professor's mind and a high school teacher. So you can modify. It does take a lot of time, but it is possible. And before I mute, I will just say it's African American and Latinx History by Dr. Paul Ortiz. That's the book.
Great, thank you. So we have another question here, and please feel free to submit more questions. So the question is, can both presenters talk about how the arts are or should be incorporated into the work of the course?
I'll go first on this one because it might be hard for Kyle to do it. I will say that this year we ran out of time to do a lot of work with the arts. It's definitely something that I incorporated more last year, but especially we did a unit on like music, and so that I'm going to try to do more with the Latino part this time around, but I think it's vitally important. We just got so stuck in the muck of all the other historical stuff that that's definitely a fail on my part. So I don't know, I can let Kyle try to answer, but I don't know that he's got anything to add with that one. Yeah, I didn't, yeah, again, like that was definitely something that this year we just didn't get to. Yeah. Maybe in this second semester though, so hopefully I can still rebound.
So I'll give it some time, see if we have any further questions. Okay.
Is there, if you don't have any more, is there anything that we did not touch on or that I did not ask that you wish I had asked?
I think you've definitely touched on everything. And I thank you for the great questions that made me really have to think more than I thought I was going to have to. But I will say that this class is so necessary, and I'm really hoping that when the data comes out, I'm proven wrong. But my gut feeling is that the kids who are taking the class mostly are Black and Latino. And just anecdotally, I know that from my own kids' district, but I really do just think this should be a mandatory course, like period. This is a class that you take in Connecticut because it is just so phenomenally well researched, well done, and it's just so important. And so the idea that most Connecticut students won't get it is heartbreaking to me, because again, if it's just an elective, you know, a lot of kids unfortunately could opt out. So I think that would be my one thing. If superintendents are listening, like, make it mandatory.
Okay. Kyle, is there anything you really wanted to talk about that I didn't touch on?
Yeah, I think you touched on everything. You asked some good questions. It was like I had to think about my answers because it was like, or you went into depth or more in depth than I thought. The only thing I would say, we just need more time because I have enjoyed it.
Mhm. Well, thank you. Thank you.
So I do have a couple more questions.
Okay.
Okay. So this is a two-part question. Why is the focus on just Puerto Rican history? Should it branch out to other Latin American history? And then the second question is, should this be broken into two separate classes, African American history, etc.?
Actually, it's not just Puerto Rican. There is a unit that's solely Puerto Rican, and I think it's beautiful because the Puerto Rican experience in Connecticut, and I mean, especially Connecticut, but also just in America, is different from the experience of Latino people from other parts of Latin America. And so we definitely branch out. There really is. There's one unit where we focus primarily on Puerto Rico. It's Unit 3. But those lessons I think are so important, and it could be just the bias of the fact that I have so many students who are Puerto Rican, but I think that that's a misnomer because it definitely does not just cover Puerto Rican history. That's why it's the Puerto Rican and Latino. And I'm pretty sure there was a debate on, is it just going to be Latino, or do we also see, bring out Puerto Rican, because it is a history of its own that is so different. And then do I think it should be broken into two classes? Yeah, again, like I think it could be 2 full year classes. I guess we'd be mandating that kids are going to school forever. I'm not sure how you would do it, but in order to really get, and again, you've had Kyle say a few times now, to really get the learning, to get the information, there just needs to be that time for it to sit and resonate with the kids. So I would love for it to be broken up. I just don't know how, what you would replace in order to keep it at a 4-year, high school curriculum.
I would say it's like it should and shouldn't because it's like all connected. If you look at it, they all become connected in the end, or every history leads up to the other. And for example, Latino studies, I'm learning that it's more than what it seemed, and everything was like connected to, like Christopher Columbus. Now that was connected to slavery, or it was like they created the system of slavery, or like, yeah. So I think it's all connected, so it can be broken up, but some things are meant to like just at one point you have to make the connections, or after you learn everything you're gonna be able to make the connections. And yeah.
Ooh, I like that. I think Kyle is onto something, and maybe to do it, I do know one person who's thinking of trying to have a full year and just blending the two courses together because it is so interconnected. So I'm going to go with his answer instead.
Yes, that was great. So we have another question here. How will the legislature encourage districts to offer the course if districts say they do not have enough students interested? While they offer the course, it actually does not take place.
I don't know how I can answer that one. I'm thankful. I know where my kids will be going to high school, that it's offered there, at least as of now. I don't know that this would be a class you could do where you have a teacher teaching it remotely into an empty, me teaching a class remotely and recording it and being given to kids at another school. I mean, I guess that's possible, but I think you'd miss out on so much. As we've all learned, we missed out on a lot when we had to do remote learning. But I think for a class like this, it would be really hard. But if it was the only way, then perhaps you do find a few teachers who would be willing to do the synchronous learning with distance and in the classroom, so that kids who want to take it can take it. And yeah, I guess that would be the only way, because you take a chance. I mean, my thing, but I'm not a superintendent, would be to take that chance and say, okay, you know what, only 6 kids signed up. We're gonna have this class this year for these 6 kids. And then I would bet that word of mouth would spread, and the following year there would be more. So I think I would also offer that up. Take the chance for one teacher to be teaching it to a small group of kids, and then see what happens.
I say it's like it all depends, because some kids don't like to test new things or like to try new things. They might think it's more difficult than the simpler classes. So I say just like make it like, or when you do make like a survey and they answer if how many people want to take it, I say make it like at least 1/4 it's mandatory, or like 1/4 is mandatory. They learn the basics, or like it like the start of it, but like the start of the hardship that went on, and then if they don't want to take it after, then you take it out, because most kids don't like new things. And for example, when I heard about the class, it was like, okay, it's just another class. I knew it was mandatory, but it was like, okay, if I had the opportunity, it was like, okay, I would take the class, but if I'm sure that most kids in my class, if they had the opportunity at the start, they would have never taken the class, because they would have thought it was more difficult than the other simpler classes.
Okay, we have about 1 minute left. Do we have one more question?
So we have 2 comments. The first comment is, I'm not sure people are aware that the materials and information are as important for BICOC as for white students. So, and then the second comment is, teaching a class with low enrollment is very expensive to the district. That would be hard to pass in a budget.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for for those questions, and for giving us a thoughtful hour and 15 minutes. Kyle and Denise, you were just wonderful. Best of luck as you continue on this journey. And it would be just wonderful if we could connect with you again and see, once you've been through the whole year, and see where you are then. And I'm sure you'll have more great suggestions for those of us who are on the call today. And
on behalf of CABE, I want to thank Martha, Denise, and Kyle. And Kyle, I have a suggestion for your advocacy. I think you'd be a terrific school board member. So think about that. Maybe not this year, maybe wait a couple of years, but don't lose that thought.
okay.
Thank you all so much. And thank you for those that participated. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thank you.